This podcast is made possible in part by Patreon support, and I'd like to say thank you to our two newest patrons, Marcelo and Galloway. They both joined at the $3 a month plus alpha tier. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So if you'd like to be as incredible as they are, you can head on over to japankyo.com/Patreon. Sign up for as little as $1 a month. Every little bit helps, and you're going to get early access to the episodes, plus occasional bonus content. I don't do it too frequently, but every once in a while I do throw in a little extra something over there. So again, japankyo.com/Patreon. Sign up if you can. Thank you so much to everyone, and here's the show. Welcome to Japan Station, a production of japankyo.com. I'm your host, Tony Vega. Sorry, I know if you've listened to the show before, you've heard me say this a million times, but subscribe to the show if you haven't already. Leave a rating and a review. All that stuff does help out immensely with discoverability. People like to see the reviews, but that subscribing figure or whatever it is, that regular number of new people subscribing, that helps a lot too with the rankings over on Apple Podcasts. So go do that if you haven't already. It just takes a 1 second, one touch on your phone. I would greatly, greatly appreciate that. And if you need to get in touch with me, you can find me on Twitter at Japankyo News. Go follow over there, or you can send an email to mail@japanstationpodcast.com. All right, so let's get to my guest today. So today you're going to get to hear a conversation that I had with Winston Chu. Winston is the CEO and co-founder of Wayfarer Hotels. That's Wayfarer Hotels. You can find them over at wayfarer-hotels.com. They've got 3 locations in Kyoto, and they're planning to expand into Osaka and Tokyo. Now, the story of Wayfarer Hotels is super, super interesting. I'm not going to spoil too much of it, but let's just say that Winston started the company right as the pandemic was about to get started, or right as it had just gotten started, right before the country of Japan just shut down its borders. And he has managed to keep that thing going somehow through just sheer hard work and willpower and just trying to make things as efficient as possible. He's managed to survive, and he's done pretty well. And now the company is probably going to keep expanding. Actually, he did expand already from 1 hotel into 3. And Winston is just a really nice, interesting guy. We talk about anime and a little bit of that kind of pop culture stuff in the beginning, but then we get into the story of Wayfarer Hotels. Now, how did I find out about all this? Well, I got an email from someone on Winston's team, and I asked them about the hotel, company and Winston. And when I learned the crazy experience that Winston had, I decided, no, I got to talk to Winston. So this is one of those occasions where I get an email and this is like, oh my God, this is a perfect story for the podcast. I do occasionally get emails that are like, I was like, sorry, maybe I'll pass on this one. But yeah, I really enjoyed talking to Winston and learning about Wayfarer and all that. So again, Wayfarer Hotels, that's wayfarer-hotels.com. You can find a link in the show notes. If you're planning to go to Kyoto especially, you might want to check them out and go to their website, because that helps them out in terms of commissions. They don't have to pay as much. But anyway, again, if you're interested, if you're planning to go to Kyoto in the near future, this is just one more option for you. All right, so let's get to it. Here is my conversation with Winston Chu.
The next stop is Japan Station. The doors on the right side will open.
All right, so what was your kind of gateway into just Japan in general? What got you interested in Japan?
Yeah, you can almost say it's a lifelong affair. My mom has been a flight attendant for, most of her life. And so my affinity to Japan started really, really young, because my mother brought it home to me on her trips abroad. And one of the favorite places she liked to go was really Japan. And so that included things like toys, cars, action figures. I got into Ultraman really, really young. Gundam, which was a bit probably above my age category, or should have been at the time.
Yeah.
Then Pokemon in 1996. My mom was like buying these. I don't know if you remember back then, before Blu-rays, before DVDs, there was something called VCDs.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, my mom was like buying these VCDs of the Pokemon anime
Uh-huh.
back home to me, and oddly enough, she was buying them in like Hong Kong as well. So I had like a of um Japanese and Cantonese dubbed Pokemon. And I gotta tell you, like, if you've never watched the Cantonese dub Pokemon, it's terrible. It's really awkward.
Uh-huh.
But I enjoyed it as a kid because I didn't know better.
Yeah.
Then moving on to the classic like Dragon Ball Z, PlayStation came out
Cool.
in 1994, and I got one a few years later. And so I really grew up with a lot of that stuff. Just the things that were exported, but the things that were actually in Japan and hot at the time.
Hmm.
And I always liked the animation in
Hmm.
particular. So if you have any exposure to like North, remember things like SpongeBob, Powerpuff Girls, Dexter's Lab. I mean, I watched all of that stuff too as a kid because I had nothing better to do. But
Yeah, yeah.
with anime and games though, like I was instantly taken by not only how different the content was, but how deep the stories were, right? If you
Mhm.
compare, say, like a Gundam or even Dragon Ball to SpongeBob, it's a whole other world in terms of storytelling.
Yeah, yeah.
Even if at that age I didn't necessarily understand it, I was like 6 to 10 years old. But
Mhm.
the narratives were very captivating, especially I mean, like for example, Gundam. It's technically about giant robots, and that's sick.
Mhm.
But it's also a story about the impact of wars on like children and like child soldiers, really, and how they cope with it,
Mhm.
which probably was not healthy for my young mind, but super super interesting.
Yeah.
Uh, and I just continued doing that as I grew up. Video games and anime. My mom still gives me shit for watching what she calls cartoons, but she doesn't seem to remember or realize that she kind of got me
These are
into
what they
it.
got you into, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's in a sense how I got interested in Japan,
Yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much from a very young age.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's kind of similar to me, except instead of the Cantonese dub, I was watching like the Spanish dubs. So,
Oh, that's
yeah.
very. Was it like a more passionate version of Pokemon? Sorry, that's a
No,
stereotype, but
I don't.
I don't
I
speak
don't. You know
Spanish.
what? What I will say is Spanish dubs tend to be pretty high quality, in my opinion. Like a lot of the English dubs in the early days, especially, were kind of like, like we make fun of them nowadays, like online. But Spanish dubs tend to be pretty good, at least in my experience.
Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure some of my team members might have actually seen Spanish dubs as well for some of these your animes and
yeah,
such.
yeah. I mean, it was bigger over there before it got big in the U.S. So I don't know. For many people, I think like that's kind of how they got interested in it. But all right, so you got into the anime and all that, but when did you first like go to Japan? Was that through your mom? Did she take you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I barely recall what it was
Mhm.
like, um, but some of my favorite memories
Mhm.
of Japan started with my mom, I
Mhm.
suppose. And back then, like I think I don't remember what age it was specifically, right?
Mhm.
But I do remember that once I started becoming, let's just say, aware of who I was and aware of my surroundings,
Mhm.
my mom took me to Japan, and I had a blast because that was the first time I actually knew what the hell was going on.
Right, right.
The biggest thing that I took away from it was my mom, because she's been to Japan for so many times, right? As a flight attendant, she
Mhm.
knew where to go, which areas, which local shops, and this was before people were traveling. People were still doing group tours back then, and
Mhm.
so it was like a very magical, very different way to travel, where you
Yeah.
really got connected to more of the local element. And despite being a bit older, I was about as considerate as a panda. Uh, and so at one point when I was like maybe like early teens or whatever, 14 maybe, I wandered Akihabara, which she brought me to,
Uh-huh.
which the electronics town in Tokyo, right?
Yeah.
And I just wandered, and it turns out I wandered for 7 hours. I didn't even know. It was great.
Damn.
I loved
Wow.
Everything there as a nerd growing up.
Uh-huh.
But what I forgot was that I left my mom waiting for me at a coffee shop for a whole 7 hours. And I guess looking back now, I am surprised she didn't call the cops.
Yeah.
But the point is, you can get endlessly lost and have a very good time in Japan.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think I've traveled to many places as you have as well. And I think pound for pound, just like for like, I do enjoy Japan the most as a tourist.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's how I got initiated. And then I had some, of course, many times I have gone to Japan before.
Mhm.
Many of my favorite memories were here.
Mhm.
My high school friends and I had our first group trip in Tokyo.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and at one point I actually got engaged, and I did that in Kyoto.
Wow.
Um, yeah, yeah. So definitely a lot of solid memories that built on top of the original affinity I had, and
Uh-huh.
of course now I ended up moving here, which was not in the life plan in the grand scheme of things, but I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously, being a tourist and being a foreign resident in Japan is very, very different, as I'm sure you can attest to,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
many
Yeah.
people have told you.
Definitely. Yeah.
But it's still very, very enjoyable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think maybe if we zoom out, right, like it's hard to define what it is exact. But if we generalize, many people really like Japan.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's why I'm excited for the borders opening next month.
Yeah.
And there are ideas as to why. I mean, what's your take on it?
Why people like Japan so much? Well, I think that Japan, well, I mean, of course, there's the whole, pop culture aspect, which, I mean, next to the US, is like what country has the most kind of prominent pop culture, wide-reaching pop culture in the world? I mean, I think Japan is pretty safely up there second. I don't know. I can't think of another one that has such a massive impact when you bring in video games and anime, and then you throw in, the music, maybe not so much, but still definitely does have some impact. So plus the movies, all that stuff, of course, that's a huge kind of easy gateway into it, right? And then on top of that, then you have all the kind of cultural things, right? You have the martial arts, you have, of course, the food.
Yeah.
You have the tea and the history. And then, of course, you have like the language nerds like me that go crazy about the language. So I think there's just so many different kind of inroads into Japan. And then once you're there, I mean, one of the wonderful things about Japan is that it's so, well, one, it's so easy to get around and it's so safe. And generally speaking, the people are very nice and helpful. So it's just very easy to find your niche within that whole Japan sphere, I think.
Yeah, actually, yeah, I think that resonates with me, that angle where I've definitely heard a lot of people who came just to train in martial arts, right, like Aikido or karate,
Yeah.
and then you have the classic gaming and anime. The inroads are pretty amazing, and certainly I think Japan has a lot of stuff that people classify as weird, or quirky,
Yeah.
which I mean, what you're doing with your content that. And you can make entire YouTube channels out of this shit. Like, maybe it's just my algorithm, right? But I don't think there's a channel for, say, abroad in Brazil, or
Yeah, I
or
haven't
somewhere
seen
else.
it. Maybe it's the algorithm, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so obviously you get to live here. You see weird stuff, and it actually just it's quote unquote weird, but I mean daily life here is not as weird. But
Exactly.
I think it definitely adds to the story of Japan.
Yeah.
And my personal view, my belief is, alongside the inroads, is that there's a lot of positive feelings that many people have for Japan, from, say, a sense of the content and the familiarity and the exports they've had. Over, say, from 1950s to even the 1980s, that Japan developed with their content and their trade. So we grew up really with the sports are super high quality, right? The electronics, the cars. At one point, everyone wanted a Japanese flip phone, until the iPhone came out.
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously you have the food, you have Hello Kitty, Pokemon, Nintendo, PlayStation. And so for several generations, we did have a lot of exposure to these Japanese products and content, more so than I think any faraway country, or more so than any other country in Asia.
Hmm.
And so I think that helped a lot.
Yeah.
And maybe it's similar to now how it is many people like, they love South Korea, which
Hmm.
has
Yeah.
successfully exported and introduced Korean culture to many parts of the world. I think Japan might have been the first one to do that, though, back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, as we were talking about, like, for example, for me, I really started watching anime in Peru when I was living there as a kid for like a couple years. And so I think, I mean, I can't remember so clearly, but I think I was watching that not fully aware that that was from Japan. And, I think a lot of people go through that in various ways, whether it's with the electronics or the cars or the anime or something, like there are aspects of our daily life that when you like scratch beyond the surface, you go like, oh, this is actually like a Japanese company, or, there's some sort of Japanese connection there. And for the people that actually do scratch beyond the surface, I think that then gets them curious to want to learn more about Japan.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Wayfarer. Could you tell us like what it is? And then, I really want to get into like the whole crazy journey that you went through, like, cause you started right before the pandemic or right about when it started getting crazy. And I know you went through a whole thing. I want to hear about that, but maybe you can just give us an idea, like what you do, what it is.
Yeah, I think we'll start off with like why we founded it and
Yeah.
why it exists, and then we can go over the crazy things that happened. We certainly got the timing down to the T, right?
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So back in like 2018, I was working out of Hong Kong as an investor in technology and consumer companies, investing globally. And so I was quite lucky in just being exposed to the possibilities of technology and consumer companies very early on, and how digital transformation was happening around the world. Now, by that time, Japan tourism was growing like crazy. I think it was named by the World Tourism Association as the fastest growing tourism destination in the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the same time, though, Japan, in terms of hotel room supply and tourism infrastructure, was actually quite tight. It wasn't very well developed. And so you can imagine that everyone started getting into hotels because it was fast growing. There were like government support programs. And I had a friend who had just moved to Japan and was looking at real estate and started naturally to look at hotels because it was the hot market, right? You can, as an investor, you can generate a good return from it was the expectation. And out of curiosity, I went to Japan to look with him. And we went to all the gateway cities, so Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto. And we visited maybe 30, 40 hotels. And because we were looking at it from an investment angle, we got to dive deep into understanding their numbers, interviewing the managers of the operation. And look, I mean, we weren't expecting something on the cutting edge, but what we saw was pretty shockingly archaic. And this is not just within Japan. I think hotels all around the world can digitize better. But I think within Japan, there, because of certain cultural factors around the motenashi, it's perhaps even more entrenched, right? And the average customer or traveler, if you stay at a hotel, you guys only see the front of house, which generally is a well-known environment. But what they have no idea is that in the back of the hotel, it's like an administrative and operational nightmare. It's a fire that they're throwing bodies at people to try and solve, and that makes it very, very inefficient, which I'll go into a bit more later. So when I got to look at that, we saw a huge opportunity to create something different that helps the hotel industry get to the next stage of being of digital transformation by leveraging my experience in finance, technology, and consumer. And so the name we came up with was Wayfarer, which is another term for nomad. And so what do nomads do, right? They roam the land, they explore, they have a strong sense of community. And we wanted to bring that type of a lifestyle and that mentality to hotels that we managed. if we dive into, what is the challenges that the traditional hotel are encountering, the vast majority of the market is quite outdated. It's a business with operating procedures and service standards that really haven't changed much in the last 20 years. And so quite low tech, lots of manual repetitive tasks, which means a very high labor intensity for things that don't necessarily add value for anyone. And that presents issues for all of the stakeholders in the hotel business, right? So you have basically three stakeholders in any hotel business. You have the property partners or owners that we work with. Now they own the building, right? And so all they're looking for is they want a high return on their investment. And an inefficient operation that's as outdated as it is fails to achieve that. The second stakeholders are travelers. And as I mentioned earlier, right, no one does group traveling. Their travelers are very independent now. They like things that are fast, hassle-free, on demand. You and I guess we can call ourselves digital natives, or in some cases, nomads. A bit cringe there, but it's true. So we want to explore, right? You and I, we don't want to be locked into the hotel.
Absolutely, yeah. It's like, I don't need that. I just let me go. I can do it.
Yeah, locked into the itinerary, which is why it was so funny when the Japanese government wanted to start opening up maybe a month or two ago. They're like, yeah, you can only come if you join a strict group tour itinerary. So they were opening it up, and I think they were allowing like 20,000 travelers per day, and like the total across 2 months was like 8,000 travelers because no one wanted to come to Japan.
No surprise.
Yeah. And so the user experience of the hotel product for travelers really doesn't reflect that modern method of travel, right? So, for example, just on the basics, we've all been there in a hotel where a check-in process takes 5 to 10 minutes, and in some really bad cases, I've heard it taking 30 minutes or more. But it goes further than that, right? Like if you're an independent traveler, unless you're staying at a 5-star Ritz-Carlton with a concierge, how do you know what to do? You end up having this process of jumping on TripAdvisor, asking your friends, looking on Google, and some people enjoy that. But at the same time, it would be great if you got some help. You got some help from the guys who are actually there physically in the location you're going to stay. Nothing like high pressure sales tactics. It's just like, okay, well, here's what we curated that we think you can do and check out on your own time. And oh, cool. Hey, we have some partnerships and deals with some of these shops that you may not have found otherwise. And then the third stakeholder are the employees, right? The strict hierarchy, the rigid customer service scripts. Like, you have guides. They write guides on how you bow. There's a slow career progression, and many other things have made the hotel job relatively unattractive. And while I can understand this level of control in a sense, because hotels are very, very complicated operations, clearly something's not working, because the hotel employee turnover in Japan historically, I read somewhere, is like 51%.
Wow.
So 1 in 2 leave every year. And the hotel industry globally has really developed a reputation for overworked, underpaid, underappreciated as a career path. Now, fortunately for our stakeholders, for these three stakeholders, the property partners, the travelers, the employees, the world has changed a lot in the last 20 years, right? Back then we didn't have Apple Cloud, we didn't have Netflix. And so things don't need to be this way. And at Wayfarer, what we're trying to do is redefine the hotel business so that in a modern sense, by digitalizing it, we meet the expectations of these three stakeholders. Yeah, and so I won't get into the nitty gritty of it because no one cares. It's we use a different operational approach. We use technology to automate some operations, and we try to improve the traveler experience by putting it in a user experience format that nowadays we're used to. Right. We're trying to build an environment of trust and communication within our team. And now we're not there yet, not even close. Maybe 5% of our journey has been completed. And we're really just getting back on our feet after surviving COVID. But I do think we are onto something because we survived COVID, and we have actually not only survived but outperformed many of the other hotels in Kyoto during COVID. And this was with like our first hotel, at least, was not ideal. It's like old. It was converted from residential. It still has a garage out in front of it. But with this hotel, we outperformed everyone else on the street with more experience and more money. So I call this initial B. What happened effectively, where we drove the crappy Toyota and we're able to beat all the other nice spec'd up cars.
Nice. Okay. I watched that, so I get that reference. But
and hopefully we'll be able to upgrade to better cars in the future. But yeah, COVID was a disaster, right? Everyone knows that, and I'm not sure the extent of which it is appreciated if you're not in the hotel industry, right? For many of us, I was locked at home. It was lonely. I shopped a lot online. But it really was the worst crisis in the history of travel since the invention of the airplane. And so Wayfarer, we started the company in October of 2019. And then in December 2019, this is COVID. And then that's the end. GG, right? is what pretty much should have happened. At the time, we were planning to take over a small, older hotel in Kyoto. And, I had never run a hotel. We had no team. I had no idea what I was really doing. And I was still planning my move to Japan from Hong Kong. But we decided to launch the hotel anyway in June 2020, because at the time, no one really knew how long COVID would extend. Right? You kind of draw comparisons with SARS back then. You're like, oh, it'll be gone by the end of the year. And it turns out we were extremely, extremely wrong. But, I was stuck in Hong Kong as a result during most of 2020. And we just started figuring things out remotely while hotels all around us crumbled. And it was a bad time, right? Like, I was dealing with a personal loss. I had given up my career to pursue this opportunity, only to step into death's door. And but during November 2020, if I remember, November 2020, just like us, the government of Japan, or in many parts of the world, actually, the government of Japan thought, the COVID cases are declining, and so it's over. We can open up the borders. And I took that chance to sneak in, without any expectation that I would be staying in Japan, or fully moving to Japan. Right, my permanent move to Japan happened completely by accident.
So interesting.
Like I was expecting to go to Japan, try and put out some fires in the business that were accumulating and steaming. And then go back to Hong Kong in 3 months, finish my preparation for my move, and then move over in around, say, mid of 2021. But then instead, what happened was, I think in December, pretty much after only a month of opening the borders, Japan shut them again for good reason, right? The cases were picking up rapidly. And so I was really just left with the choice where I had landed in Japan. The business was going to die. And I had to decide whether, and Hong Kong was closed at that point in time too. And so I'd had choice of, do I stay and try and save what we have of Wayfarer, or do I leave and it would probably die? It was fairly apparent at that point that if I wasn't there, nothing would happen. And so I chose to stay, but I had no home. Like I couldn't rent a place, right? Because I was a tourist. I had one suitcase, but fortunately we had a hotel. All right, we had that one hotel, and so I slept in there for 6 to 7 months, working like downstairs in the office, where I still am right now, actually.
Oh wow! And
then sleeping in a hotel, until we could get the foothold on the cliff that we were falling off of during COVID. Then in 2021, we started building a team, and I finally found a place to live in June, July. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much how I ended up staying in Japan.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure you've heard, but renting a place as a foreigner in Japan is quite
Oh, oh
challenging.
yeah, it's
Um,
a hassle. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, because I made that decision, most of my life, even now, because I haven't left and gone back to Hong Kong, most of my life is actually still in Hong Kong in storage. It's been in storage for
Wow.
like 2 years. So I think by the time I go back and open the storage, like everything would just melt into a puddle. But yeah, I mean, there were some hard choices, right? It's like, do I buy another pot when I have one in Hong Kong already?
Right.
I really like that pot,
Yeah. Oh, wow. So, okay, so then like I guess you started getting like actual customers and people started coming to the hotel. Is that like how's it been? Like what was the big change?
I mean, it was less about big change. I think the entire premise of newer companies or startups being thriving over time is that there's just less legacy to deal with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we went into hotels, we didn't assume anything. We threw out any traditional playbook or established ways of managing a hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and we're like, okay, well, it's a hotel, it's COVID. How do we run a hotel and survive, like just not die?
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of went at it from that angle and just came up with processes or strategies that would let us do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was part of it. But I think
Sorry, for example, like what did you do? Like how do you survive that? I mean, my impression is like there weren't any tourists. Like how do you get through that?
Well, there's quite a few things, right? So to begin with, if you go into an average business hotel in Japan, they always put at least two people like in the hotel, sometimes like four.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I looked at it and examined, okay, well, if from a survival aspect, from a survival perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do we actually need this many people, or can I be the one standing at front desk? I'm taking phone calls, I'm cleaning rooms, which I did, for almost half a year. Is that it? Do you need that many people, right? Do you really need, say, a night shift who's often just sitting there on standby, and the poor guy's like, trying to stay awake for effectively not much, right? The only thing is like, what if there's an emergency? That 1% chance of an emergency. So there's these small things, right? Then there's just a better use of technology and better systems. And I was able to kind of leverage things to put everything on the cloud from day one. So we didn't have like a lot of legacy paper processes. We had some automations built in, even for the third-party systems that we were using, which really helped us a lot with having, say, myself and one other team member at the time be able to do the jobs of, say, 3 or 4 people in a traditional hotel. Yeah, and a lot of it was luck too. The thing about the Japan market that is lesser known is that despite inbound tourists growing really fast, most of the room nights that are stayed in a given year are actually 80% driven by the domestic tourists.
Right.
And so as long as domestic tourism was not completely dead, you would still get some travelers, right?
Gotcha.
Whether it be people coming in because they missed the train, or people using you as a love hotel, right?
Sure.
Anything to survive. And so that's how we kind of got by, keeping the cost super low, having some automations to make our lives easier, and just grinding it out.
Wow. Okay, so but I guess, well, October is the big month, we're reopening and all that, and more people will start coming in. But have you already started getting more tourists, like outside tourists?
Yeah, we have a bit. I mean, this year to date, right? I think 96% of our stays are still Japanese. But if I look forward 12 months, it's almost like 50-50 international versus domestic. And I mean, this year, the market has recovered faster than I think anyone expected, starting from April, when the government actually indicated that they were going to start opening up slowly, which is already great because you know that whenever Japan does something, they do it like step by step
Yeah, yeah.
with risk averseness.
Yeah.
But just by them taking that first step, you know that, well, give them 6 to 9 months, they'll probably be able to figure it out. And so with borders expected to open next month, we're seeing very, very encouraging data. Flight searches from South Korea, Thailand, Taiwan are going drastically. And I think if we execute on our roadmap, the Wayfarer product, moving away from the survival mode of it, hopefully we'll have it ready by the middle or the end of 2023, where we'll have a new brand, we'll have some proper marketing, we'll have a stronger technology foundation, and some very, very cool amenities that I don't think anyone has ever seen at hotels or at least within Japan.
Interesting. Okay. So, is that something you can talk about or not yet?
I'd like to keep that a surprise for now because it's very cool.
Yeah, no, well, I'm very intrigued. But okay, so right now you have the location in Kyoto, the one you mentioned, right? But you also have a location in Tokyo?
No, all of our locations are in Kyoto.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Two?
And
how many in Kyoto?
We have three. We have three properties in Kyoto. So we got lucky and we were able to connect with some property investors who saw what we were doing, how we were surviving, and gave us a chance to manage, their properties as hotels for them, even during COVID. Now, the goal for us is to move across the gateway cities of Japan, and so includes Osaka, Tokyo. Next year, we're going to Osaka.
Nice.
But Kyoto is actually I feel like it's a misunderstood market. It's only got a population, the city itself, right? It's got a population of about 1.5 million people. It's quite small, and therefore there's less data. And but I think everyone knows that Kyoto has some incredible cultural, historical attractions, right?
Yeah.
And so the supply in Kyoto is actually quite limited in terms of hotel rooms. Which means that if you're traveling around Japan, a lot of the time, because Kyoto was so full during the peak seasons, you end up not being able to stay in Kyoto. You end up having to go to, say, Osaka, maybe even Nara, or just near the prefecture instead of within the city. And so we think there's a huge opportunity in Kyoto for us to continue growing.
Yeah. No, in Kyoto, I used to live near Kyoto. I used to go all the time. I know there's tons and tons of stuff to see in Kyoto. Like, it's like one day is not enough. So, yeah.
Which part of Kyoto did you live in?
I lived in Hirakata City.
Okay.
But I also lived in Kobe. So I lived both in Osaka and Kobe. So I used to go to Kyoto pretty often. And I was close enough where I could kind of go in the morning, come back at night. But, if you're traveling the whole day and you're walking around, it's nice to be able to stay in Kyoto and then just have the next morning you can get right back to it, right?
Yeah. People treat it, because of the room supply issue, there's a lot of cases where you end up going on a day trip and it's really just not enough. I think you need a proper, minimum 3 to 5 days in Kyoto to really be able to take it in.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So, okay. So Wayfarer, so what is it? Do you go to the website to book a place, or can you do it through the typical, whatever, all those websites that compile, the aggregators and all that, or how do you go about, if you're interested in booking a place at Wayfarer?
Yeah. So, we would be on all of the online travel agencies, you call them. So Booking.com, Expedia, Airbnb. And of course, we have our own website, which we prefer if you were to book with us, because it's direct and we don't have to pay any commissions. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that.
I've heard that from other people, but probably okay.
Yeah. Too late.
Yeah.
So obviously, we don't want to pay commissions, but all Rakuten, Jalan, right? So all these channels have been incredibly helpful for allowing us to generate bookings and survive. But direct is another way, and we built our website to be quite, I'd like to think, quirky, different, and refreshing, and we'll hopefully be able to keep doing that as we work towards our rebranding in the coming year.
Yeah. So if people go to one of those Kyoto locations, you will not be at the front desk anymore, right?
Yeah, fortunately not. No, I there's better people than me doing front desk now.
Gotcha.
Yeah, we don't really even have like a set front desk person, right? It's
Uh-huh.
more like an operations team member
Uh-huh.
because we want to give people more responsibility and
Yeah.
also let them break the hierarchy of the traditional hotel. And so
Right.
they do like some stuff in the front of house, they do some stuff in the back of house. We treat them as managers, even if they're not strictly a manager,
Mm-hmm.
to give them that career development. And they also work on like business development projects for us. So there's a
Mm.
lot going on for them. But yeah, I mean, I'm a terrible front desk person, right? Like I'm terrible at customer service. I've done it before, but I was
Yeah.
never good at it. I'm terrible at service in general. Like at one point, I'm not going to name which company, but my when I was working in investments, my CEO came up to me and was like, "Hey, Winston, good job doing your stock picks and your investments. I love your work, but you have to stop making the principal investor that was our client. You have to stop making him feel like an idiot." And like, oh, I didn't know I was doing that. I'm so
Yeah.
sorry. Yeah, and so definitely not suitable for customer service. And I think the business has gone better because I'm no longer at front desk.
Well, we've all got our fortes, and it's good to know what you're good at.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh man. I just last question. So I guess when you were manning the front, you had to use Japanese and all that, like honorific language and all that. Like, is that what you were doing?
No. I mean, my Japanese is very elementary level, which
Uh,
again doesn't help with the customer service aspect. But I was like on the phone with
uh,
some international customers
yeah,
because
yeah,
we had a bunch of cancellations, right? Everyone was canceling because of COVID.
yeah,
I was dealing with online messages. I was dealing with cleaning rooms, and I think it helps just knowing what goes into that operation.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we have a culture where it's like never say that's not my job, right? So
Mhm.
if even today, if someone's like, Winston, I need you to clean a room, I will jump in and clean a room.
Mhm.
I just can't make the bed as fluffy as everyone else. So
It's okay. It's okay.
yeah,
Oh, that's okay.
yeah. But my Japanese language is not very good, and
Uh-huh.
and it's not something I'm very proud of.
Uh-huh.
But I do have a goal of getting better in the next 2 or 3 years because I'm in that no man's land, right? Where I
Yeah.
look Asian, but I
Oh
can't
yeah.
communicate
Yeah.
fluently.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
and
tricky. Like they look at you, it's like, hey, why can't you speak Japanese?
yeah, like I don't get that benefit of the doubt at the
Yeah.
beginning. And look, I mean, you're fluent in Japanese, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
so I get the
incredible.
nice surprise looks like, oh, you can speak Japanese, yay! I get the benefit.
Yeah, and dude, I don't know how you accomplished it because it's incredible, right? It's hard. I don't want to blow anyone's mind here, but
Yeah, it
Japanese
takes time.
is
It takes
hard.
time. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and the problem is with me. It's not necessarily with the language of me not having time to put in or just being tragically untalented at languages. Um, but I think also for me Japanese can be a bit frustrating, and so I really want to grasp it and learn it. I'm a pretty direct and candid person,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so the contextual
Yeah.
transformations
Oh,
within
that helps a
Japanese
lot.
are very hard to grasp.
No, but when you're learning it in context, that helps a lot more than trying to just remember like random words, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I hope to be able to learn.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you live there now, so at least you got that.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been trying to find some teachers who
Yeah,
can kind of explain the logic of the language to me
sure.
in ways I understand.
Yeah.
Because for example, like in English
Mhm.
and in Chinese as well, right? You have tenses, past,
Yeah.
present, future.
Mhm.
But and correct me if I'm wrong, right?
Yeah.
In Japanese, it seems like you have this fourth dimension where you have to like read the air or the
There's a
person.
little bit of that depending on, even with tenses, sometimes it can be a little bit vague. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also quite afraid that I'd accidentally insult someone or be rude if I say slur the end of the word slightly, which I've
Uh,
heard can mean totally different things. But yeah, hopefully I'll get there. And on the other hand, though, I do wonder what what aspect or sorry, what impact language has
mhm.
on or will have on how I interact and how I feel people. Because look, I mean, language is a huge aspect of society, right?
Yeah.
And in many ways, it defines interactions of people. So I do wonder whether people who are fluent in Japanese would generally be, say, more aware or sensitive of how other people are thinking or the environment.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, like it comes. I'll put it to you this way. So, for example, like when you're learning Japanese, and all of a sudden you learn one new word, all of a sudden you start to hear it constantly, and then you realize, like, is this just a coincidence, or was I just hearing this word but not actually hearing it because I didn't actually understand it? And usually it's the case that people were always using that word. It's just since you didn't understand it, you never paid attention to it.
Yeah, that actually, I mean, recently I found that to be the case with a new word I learned. And it might seem funny, but which is like, tokubetsu in Japanese means special, right? But as a foreigner landed in Japan, the strategy generally is to kind of like try to katakana our way into everything. Yeah. It's funny because maybe half a year ago, members of our cleaning team were trying to ask me something, and I was the only one there. And they asked me what to do about some broken equipment, and I answered, kore special gomi. And now I know that special means tokubetsu, but they laughed their asses off. And so to this day, they still call it special gomi.
But you know what? A lot of times it may sound funny, but they still understand you.
Yeah, as long as it works, right?
Yeah, that's ultimately that's what it is. What does it communicate or not? Does it get across? It does. Then you just had a conversation there. You just had an interaction. So that you don't worry too much about the mistakes as long as it gets across. That's the starting point. From there, you can polish it up.
Thanks for the encouragement, man.
Yeah. So if people are interested in checking out Wayfarer, so I guess go to the website. That's the first point of entry, I guess, huh? The best one.
Yeah, definitely.
What's the URL?
Wayfarer-hotels.com.
Gotcha. Okay. I will include a link in the show notes. So in case you're curious, this is going up October 1st. So the borders are going to be open. Guys, go crazy. I know I'm thinking about going in the summer to Japan after a long ass time that I've been able to go. So I'm looking forward to it. But I know you are too, Winston.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to meeting you. And, anyone who comes to Kyoto, please ping me on Twitter or whatever. Would love to show you around.
Yeah. I'll link all that in the show notes. You can find it in the whatever, in your app or over on japankyo.com. So thanks so much, Winston. That was a fascinating story. And I got a little peek behind the scenes in the hotel industry, which I had really not much clue about. So it's always interesting learning about something new. Thanks.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity, Tony, and hope to talk to you soon.
Just do it!